Well, welcome back. And what we are going to be doing today is we're going to continue our look at perception. And we're going to focus in today on a approach to perception, a tool to perception that can actually be extended beyond into decision making and some higher order cognitive processes. Today, we're going to be taking a look at signal detection. Now, signal detection was mentioned in your textbooks, but typically textbooks do not spend a lot of time on signal detection. And it is one of these topics that might take one or two looks before it starts to really make sense to you. But hopefully by the end of today, you will have a better sense of what signal detection is all about. And you will start to see how it can be used to really analyze certain decision-making situations, go beyond its ability to help us understand our perceptual systems and just really be a framework for helping us make decisions about how to impact our environment in the best possible ways. So this once again is all in service of understanding the human mind. And I actually like this representation of the human mind because it really does capture that idea that it does go beyond just your brain. It does go beyond your physical body. It includes your physical body. That's the embodied approach to the human mind, but it also extends out to your environment. That's the embedded approach to the human mind. So just always keep that in your human mind, that we're not just talking about the brain here, we're talking about the mind as a concept, as an idea that helps us to explain our cognitive abilities. And what we're going to be looking at today is a continued look at perception and the idea of how can we search for and find things. Part of signal detection deals with that issue of being able to navigate our world and detect things. And it really is detecting information when it is placed in a sea of similar information. So we're going to talk a lot today about noise. We're going to talk a lot today about signal. And really the idea is that you're looking for a target, much like the Where's Waldo puzzles. You're looking for a target, but it's not an isolated target in a sea of nothingness. It's an isolated target in a sea of noise. So every distractor, every person in here that's not Waldo is contributing to that noise. And your inability or your difficulty in finding Waldo is a result, not of the fact that you don't know what Waldo looks like. He's right there in case we forgot. But it's the idea that we have so much noise in this particular illustration that finding that one signal, which is where Waldo is very, very difficult. If everybody left this train station and Waldo was the only one remaining, it'd be really, really easy to detect. So that's the idea that we're going to delve into today. How can we make sense of our perceptual system and how can we understand it in terms of this idea of signal detection theory? So one of the things that signal detection theory was used for right off the bat, the reason it was applied to psychology actually came from outside of psychology. It came from engineering. And it was one of the better imports that psychology has done in terms of taking something from another science and applying it to our understanding of the human mind. But we used it predominantly in the beginning to understand just detection, just how little of a stimulus do we need in order to detect something. So what is the threshold for perception? And that really is an important topic in understanding our human mind, because if you recall, perception is just our experience as a result of external stimulation. And one question to ask is, what is the minimum amount of external stimulation that you need in order to have that experience? So determining that detection threshold is basically determining the doorway into perception. How much of something do we need before we can say, yes, I am having an experience? How much stimulus do we need before we trigger that perceptual experience, which is perception? So let's set this up with an example. Let's say that we had two individuals and we wanted to test their perceptual ability. So we got the girl on the left who does not seem to have great auditory skills, and then we have the girl on the right who seems to have hyper auditory skills. So what if we wanted to test how well do these two individuals hear? What is their sensitivity in terms of their ability to hear stimuli? So let's start with the girl that is clearly having a difficult time there. And let's say that we get her into the lab and we give her a hearing test. So we give her a hearing test, and it's going to consist of a series of trials. And we're either going to play a tone during the trial or we're not going to play a tone during the trial. So we would have some sort of visual signal to indicate that a trial has begun, such as a green light. We'd have a visual signal to indicate that the trial had ended, such as a red light. And if they detected a tone during that trial, they would say yes. And if they did not detect a tone during that trial, they would say no, for example. So that's the situation. So let's see what happens with her. So we have trial one. We play a tone. She's got hypersensitive hearing, so she basically yells out, "Yes, I hear the tone," and that is a correct response to this particular trial. And then we play one. We go to a trial, and there's no tone. And the subject indicates, "No, I didn't hear anything." And then we go to trial three, and there's no tone. The subject says, "Nope, didn't hear anything." Trial four, we get a tone. Subject once again, sensitive hearing, says, "Yes, I hear it." Got that one correct. Trial five, we play a tone. She's like, "Yeah, I hear it." She got that one correct. Trial six is a tone. Yep, heard that. She got that one correct. Trial seven, there's no tone. Correct response, no. And then trial eight, there's a tone. And once again, super sensitive hearing replies yes and got that one correct. So if we just take a look at the times when she detected a tone, we just take a look at the times when there was a tone, there was external stimulation, and she correctly perceived that external stimulation. She had that internal experience. She perceived that external stimulation. Well, in this case, we can say that she detected that tone 100% of the time. She had perfect tone detection performance. So that's her performance in this task. 100% of the time she detected that tone. Let's go to the other individual. The other individual that clearly was not able to hear whatever was coming through her headphones. So we administer a hearing test to this individual. And once again, we go through the exact same procedure and we play that tone on trial one. And this individual says, "Nope, I didn't hear anything." So she gets that trial incorrect. Trial two, there's no tone. She says, "Nope," correctly identifying that there's no tone in trial two. Trial three, there's no tone. It says nada. Trial four, there's a tone. She responds, "Nay," didn't hear a tone, gets that one incorrect. A thesaurus was one of my best friends putting this together because you can only say no so many times. Trial five, there's a tone. Now she hasn't heard the tone, gets that one incorrect. Trial six, there's a tone. Not, she doesn't hear that, gets that one incorrect. Trial seven, there's no tone. She says negative, she gets that trial correct. And then finally, trial eight, once again, there's a tone. She says no, and she gets that one incorrect. In this case, this individual has detected the tone 0% of the time, right? Just absolutely abysmal tone detection performance. So in this case, in this scenario, using this definition of sensitivity, this definition of perception and perceptual ability, we have what seems like a reasonable outcome. We have an outcome where the girl with very poor hearing, the one that had no reaction to her headphone when she was trying to pair it with her cell phone, she detects the tone 0%. The one with that easily hypersensitive hearing, they detect the tone at 100%. And we seem to have a measure of sensitivity that reflects the external reality of what is actually going on here. The person with really bad hearing detects the tone at 0. The person with really good hearing detects the tone at 100%. However, and this was the challenge with a lot of this research, pre-signal detection. Let's say that we go back and we retest the girl that detected the tone 0% of the time. So we're gonna give her a brand new hearing test. And this time we play the tones once again. And this time she answers 100% of the time correctly when there is a tone. So whenever there was a tone, she correctly this time around answered yes. Yes, I hear the tone. Yep, I hear the tone. Affirmative, I hear that tone. And in this case, she detects a tone 100%. So 100% of the time, she was saying yes. Every single time that there was a tone playing, she got that correct. Now the question is how did this individual who has no hearing ability, no sensitivity to the tone, how did they all of a sudden match the ability of the person that has hypersensitive hearing? All of a sudden, our measure that seemed to be making so much sense and seemed to be so close to the external reality of the situation previously has now on this session given us a totally incorrect view of what the external reality is. Now we have two individuals, one with super great hearing, one with incredibly poor hearing, but they have both detected the tone at 100%. So what is going on here? Well, what's going on here is that we have only been looking at when they detect the tone. We have only so far focused on trials where the tone was present, and we haven't been focusing on trials where the tone is not present. So if we do that, if we start to do that, we can compare their performance to when the tone was present and when the tone was not present. And this individual with the super sensitive hearing, when the tone was present, they would say yes. And then if you recall, when the tone was not present, they would say no. So in trial 2, they said, no, I didn't hear anything. Trial 3, they said no. Trial 7, they said no. So they got 100% correct when the tones were present, and they got 100% correct when the tones were absent. Now, what about the other individual, the one that can't hear anything? Well, in the initial trial, she wasn't able to hear anything. So for every single trial, she said no tone. And let's say that for whatever reason, she felt really bad about her performance. Let's say that she was embarrassed about her performance. Let's say that she really, really wanted to be able to detect those tones. Let's say that for whatever reason, when she came back, she told herself, all right, this time I'm going to detect 100% of those tones. This time, there's not going to be a single tone that makes it by my perceptual ability. This time, I'm going to get them all correct when the tone is there. So what did she do? Well, on trial 1, when there was a tone, she said yes. And now on trial 2, where there was no tone, she also said yes. On trial 3, where there was no tone, she also said yes, I hear a tone. So she changed her strategy. She changed her criteria and went in there and said, you know what, even if I don't hear anything, even if I can't hear a single solitary sound coming into these headphones, whenever that green light turns on, that the trial has begun, I'm going to say, yes, I hear a tone. So trial 4, she says yes. She gets that correct. Trial 5, trial 6, she says yes, she gets that correct. Trial 7, she says yes, that's incorrect. In trial 8, she says yes as well. However, if we only look at the trials where the tones were being played, she has 100% correct detection of those particular tones. She has 100% correct detection on tones where there was a trial. So clearly, we need a better way of measuring sensitivity. Clearly, we need a better procedure for finding out and measuring what is the perceptual capabilities of these two individuals, because it is very clear that these two individuals have very different hearing systems. And yet, the one on the left, just by changing her strategy, was able to change her score drastically on this test without changing her ability. And that's what we need to guard against. We need to guard against these changes in strategy that can affect your score, because a change in strategy is not going to change your perceptual ability. A change in whether you're going to say yes more often is not going to change your ability to detect these tones. So what we need is a system that can take into account these shifts in strategy and prevent against them, inoculate against them, and that's what we have with signal detection. So to answer this issue, psychologists adopted signal detection. Once again, this came from engineering, working on radio systems, working on other information systems, where they came up with a formula, they came up with a strategy, a theory, and psychologists said, well, that looks really good. Let's try to apply that. And for once, it actually really worked very well. So signal detection is used to measure the sensitivity of a perceptual system. So how much of a signal do you need before you can have an experience? And also, how much of a difference between signals do you need before you can say that is a different signal than that? So this sensitivity measures the ability of your organism or of your perceptual organ to detect or respond to external stimuli. And it gives it a score that is called D prime, that is also just called sensitivity in the signal detection paradigm. And that sensitivity is measured as the distance between the signal distribution and the noise distribution using a formula that they have in that signal detection paradigm. So that sensitivity is that distance between a signal distribution, technically a single signal and noise distribution, we'll get there in a moment, and a noise distribution using that signal detection paradigm. So what are these distributions? Well, let's start off with the easy one. We'll start off with a noise distribution. And for one of my favorite explanations of a noise distribution, we're going to turn to John Cage. And I didn't know whether to use this image of John Cage surrounded by technology. He's an American composer, he's a music theorist. I didn't know if I should use the one where he's surrounded by technology or if I should use the one where he's surrounded by nature. Both of them, as you're going to see real soon, are very appropriate. However, he's an American composer. He's very experimental. He was very avant-garde. And just to kind of give you an indication of his sort of musical tastes and his musical genre, I'm going to show you a video of a performance of one of his most famous pieces called 433.
And now, a performance of John Cage's 433. Please welcome our soloist, William Marks.
It's a great story about why he did it. He went to an art exhibit. I can't remember the name of the artist, but he went to an art exhibit, and it was an entire exhibit, an entire gallery of multiple paintings of white paint on a white canvas. That was it. And it was hung up on the walls, white paint on white canvas. And they asked the artist, well, what's going on? Why the white paint on the white canvas? And the artist said, well, every single time that you see a piece of art, you are actively participating in the creation of that art. Like the mere perception of the art, you bring stuff to the art that is active in making that art a experience, right? So it's not just a painting hanging up in a museum, or an art gallery, it's actually you coming to the painting, you contribute to it. And these white blank canvases, what they did was they magnified the contribution of the viewer to the art piece. Because all of a sudden there was nothing there to distract you, and you could see the shadow that you cast onto the artwork. You could hear the sounds of everybody else around you in the gallery. You could see what exactly you were bringing to your own thoughts, your own ideas to this art piece. And when John Cage saw that, he said that was brilliant, and he needed to do that for music. So he did that with 433. And basically, if you were really paying attention during the performance of 433, it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, but not at any point during the composition is there any silence whatsoever. So there are sounds coming from the audience. There's the sounds of the movement of the pianist. There's the click of the stopwatch. There's the opening and closing of the piano. There's sounds all over the place. And that was one of the things that John Cage was really interested in, was the idea of silence. He was really interested in this idea of what silence is and what silence can bring to your system. And I forgot to animate that, so I'm going to set up the story before I get there. So he heard about an anechoic chamber at Harvard University. So this chamber was used in their sound research, and it was a chamber that basically eliminated all sound. So it was highly insulated, and there was no sounds that would come in from the outside world, and it would have sound, insulation that would decrease the echo or anything inside the chamber. It was basically the most soundproof place on earth. And John Cage was ecstatic that he could finally go and could finally hear silence, because you never hear silence. Like even right now, just right. We got sounds outside. We got sounds outside the university. You are almost, I would say not almost, you are never in a position where there is silence. And actually we'll see that that is absolutely true. You are never in a position of silence, because when John Cage went to this anechoic chamber, he heard a very high tone, a high-pitched tone, and he heard another low-pitched tone. And he was extremely disappointed, because he thought to himself, oh my gosh, I finally get to hear silence. I finally get to get out of the city, get out of the nature, get out of everywhere. This human experience, this experience I've never had, I finally get to have it. Here we go, this perfect soundproof chamber. And he goes in there and he hears a high-pitched sound and he hears a low-pitched sound. And he goes to the engineers and he complains. And he says, I thought you said your chamber was soundproof. Your chamber is not soundproof. And they told him, he goes, I heard two sounds. This is from his book, Silence. I heard two sounds, one high and one low. When I described them to the engineer in charge, he informed me that the high one was my nervous system in operation, and the low one, my blood in circulation. So even when all outside stimulation was taken away, he still had sound. He still had noise. Some of it coming from just the activation of his nervous system, just the random firings that your nervous system has, made a high-pitched sound, and the actual blood circulating through his body made a low-pitched sound. So when all external stimulation was taken away, John Cage still experienced noise. And that noise is the noise that was in his system. And that noise in the system itself is what that noise distribution is. So in any situation where you're trying to detect a signal, you are not trying to detect a signal in the absence of any other stimulation. You are always, always, always trying to detect that signal in the presence of noise. Noise is part of every perceptual system that there is, whether your radar or a human eyeball or a human ear, there's always noise in that system. So we know there's noise in the system, and we talk about a noise distribution. So what is that noise distribution? Well, your noise distribution is the noise in your system when there's no signal present, and it actually follows, according to this theory, it follows a distribution. It has a specific kind of pattern to it, a specific sort of frequency with which noise occurs. So let's take an example in a situation that some of you might at some point find yourself in. I find myself in this oftentimes. Let's say that you are a teacher teaching a class, and one of the decisions that you have to make, one of the things that you need to detect is the hand that goes up. Right? So you want to be able to detect when a student has a question and they put their hand up versus when a student doesn't have a question and does not put their hand up. However, as you can see in this little example here, we're not looking at students who are sitting there very still. And then if they have a question, put their hand up. We're looking at students that are fixing their shirts. We're looking at students that for some reason raise both hands and then just put them down. We're looking at students that have a posture like this and might move their hand around. So is this a hand up or is that not a hand up? So there's a lot of noise in this system where these students are moving around, and you need to determine as a teacher, you need to make that decision, which one of these is a hand up and which one of these is maybe like that girl in the center, just somebody who's stretching or somebody who is just thinking to themselves. Which one of these is a hand up versus which one of it is noise that is in the system. So the motion in the classroom in this example here, that's the noise in the system. And any child with a raised hand, that is the signal. And the signal is always added to the noise. The signal is not in isolation, it's always added to the noise. And then your decision is to determine whether there's a signal present, is a kid raising their hand, or is that signal not present, is there no raising? All right, so let's start to put some visuals to this, some distributions to this, something that'll hopefully help you understand this a little bit better, put some concrete visuals to this problem. So in signal detection theory, one of the things that we assume is that there is evidence that the signal is there. So there is some sort of evidence that there's actually a signal present. So if you're trying to detect an auditory signal, like the girls in the headphones with the hearing test, there is some sort of loudness, and that is your evidence. The louder something is, the more evidence that you would have. So this evidence goes from the left, where there is very little evidence that there is a signal, all the way to the right, where there's a bunch of evidence that there is a signal. So that's the first thing we need to know, that there is a different amount of evidence for different situations, and that evidence indicates whether a signal is present or absent. And then on the y-axis there, we have the frequency of impression. And what that means is how often does a certain level of evidence occur? That's the frequency of impression. The higher the line, the more that level of evidence occurs. The lower the line, the less that level of evidence occurs. And then we have the noise distribution. And we're going to apply this to the classroom example. So you have this noise distribution, and it looks like this. And this is the distribution of evidence that occurs when there is absolutely no hand raised. There is no signal being given. There is no hand that is being raised to ask a question. However, we have noise in the system, and it's on this evidence line because it looks like a hand raised. It gives, in this case, incorrect evidence that there's a hand raised. So this distribution, this frequency of impression, you can think of it literally as children stacked on top of other children. And that's what makes this distribution. So to show this a little bit more clearly, you're going to have one child in this classroom, and they're going to be the ones that just can't stand still. They can't sit still. They're very energetic, they're very outgoing. For whatever reason, their hands are always moving. So that child is providing a lot of evidence that their hand is up, right? Because every time they go like this, every time they go like this, every time they're kind of moving around, going like this, that's a lot of evidence. Now, it doesn't happen very often, right? Because children like that are going to be more rare. So it doesn't happen very often, which is why the line on that noise distribution is so low. But we do have that one child that is giving off a lot of evidence that they want the teacher to call on them because it looks like they're raising their hand. Now, on the other side of that distribution, you're going to have very few children. Once again, that's why the line is so low. You have very few children that give absolutely no evidence. And these will be the children in the classroom that are like this the whole time and don't move at all. And maybe just kind of tilt their head and move their eyes, but they are standing there, sitting there like a statue, right? They don't move at all. Again, not very many people like this exist, which is why that end of the noise distribution is so low. So usually you're not going to have that really low level of evidence, right, in the noise distribution. Usually you're not going to have that really high level of evidence in the noise distribution. You're going to have those very infrequently. What you are going to have a lot of are the kids in the middle. So these are the children that move every once in a while, but they're not moving all the time. So they're giving evidence, but it's not a ton of evidence that they want to be called on. And again, remember, this is not wanting to be called on. No child is raising their hand in this noise distribution. These are just the things that happen when no child is raising their hand. And we have this individual here where they move sometimes, but they don't move other times. They're not as active as the child all the way on the right, but they're not as still as a child all the way on the left. They're giving you that kind of middle level of activity when they're not raising their hand. In these children, there are a lot of children that are like this particular individual. And that's why the distribution is so high for this particular level of evidence, right? Because this is the majority. This is the typical activity level that you would see in a particular student. And then that noise distribution is literally made of every single person, every single student, and how much they move, how much evidence they're giving that they want to be called on, that they have their hand raised when no hand is being raised. Okay, so that's the noise distribution. Any questions on the noise distribution yet? Perfect. So that's the noise distribution. That is the noise in the system. That is what the teacher is faced with when there's no hand being raised. Now, what happens when a hand does get raised? Well, what happens when a hand does get raised is that it gets raised by whatever individual is doing the hand raising. So that signal gets added to however that person moves to begin with when there's no signal there. So if we have an individual that is very active and they're always moving around and they can't sit still, they always have that activity. When they put their hand up, they're not going to stop, right? They're not all of a sudden going to just sit there like a statue. They're going to keep moving around and they'll have their hand up and they might be fidgeting in their seat like this, but they'll be moving around. So that signal of my hand is up gets added to their noise that they normally have when the hand's not up. That child that is sitting there like a statue, when they add signal to their distribution, they're going to be sitting there like a statue, and then they're going to add the signal to that noise distribution. And that's it. They're not all of a sudden going to start fidgeting, right? They're going to still be the way that they typically are, very still, but now with the hand up. So the signal distribution, it's never just a signal distribution. It is always the signal plus noise distribution. The amount of evidence that is being given that a signal is there is the amount of evidence that there gets added to it by the signal, where you start with the amount of noise. So the total amount of evidence starts with the noise that you start with plus the evidence that you get from the signal. So it's a signal plus noise distribution. It is assumed that it is exactly the same distribution, just moved a little bit further along the increasing evidence x-axis. And that's literally because all of these people, all of these children, when they don't have their hand raised, are in that distribution. But as soon as they add the signal, they all move over to this distribution. And the person who was low evidence to begin with stays on the lower end of that signal plus noise distribution. They move up in evidence, but they stay on that lower end of that signal noise distribution. The person that was high on on noise stays on the high end of the signal plus noise distribution. And everybody that was in the middle of the noise distribution stays in the middle of that signal plus noise distribution. All right, so that's the way to think about the distributions. People stacked on top of other people. And what they do in the noise distribution is what they do when there's no signal present. And then when they add a signal to that, you take all the noise, you add the signal to it, and you just move on down that evidence distribution. Okay, so how does this allow us to understand sensitivity? Well, if this is your noise distribution and this is your signal plus noise distribution, what we can define is we can define sensitivity as just the distance between those two peaks. So in this case, sensitivity, that D prime, that would be the difference between those two peaks. And we're going to see in our cog lab especially how when that distance is large, you are very sensitive and very good at detecting whether something is there or whether something is not. Very good at detecting whether the signal is present or absent. But when that D prime is small and those peaks are close together, you are very poor at detecting whether something is there or whether something is not. So it does give us that idea of sensitivity. The last thing that we need in order to turn this into a full-fledged theory of perception and decision-making is we need a criterion. And what a criterion is, it is the level of evidence that you personally select, that level of evidence where anything higher than that level of evidence, you're going to say, yes, I see a signal, I detect a signal. And anything lower than that level of evidence, you're going to say no. So in this case, anybody that is moving in that classroom and has evidence that is beyond that criterion, the teacher is going to say, yes, Johnny, you have a question. And anybody that is below that level of evidence, the teacher, isn't going to say anything, but they're not going to call on them. They're going to say, no, I don't see a hand up, so I'm going to continue on with whatever I'm doing. So what does this lead to in terms of outcomes for this situation? So we're just going to move that to the top so we got a little bit of space. And we're going to start off with the noise distribution. So let's get rid of that signal distribution, signal plus noise. I keep saying signal, technically signal plus noise. So in this case, you can see that the noise distribution is not all the way on the no side, right? Part of that noise distribution is on the yes side. So there's a part of the noise distribution that indicates an incorrect response. So let's take a look at that incorrect positions. So, let's take a look at the correct one first. So the part of the noise distribution that is to the left of that criterion line. So nothing is there. The noise distribution again is when no signal is present, no hand is raised, nothing is there, and the teacher does not call on the student. Well, that is a correct answer, and that is known as a correct rejection. So you looked to see if there was a signal. You said, no, I reject that there is a signal. And it turns out there was no signal, so you're correct. So when you say no, when there's actually no signal present, that's a correct rejection. However, notice that there are some instances where the evidence goes beyond that criteria, mostly for the children that are very, very active. And in that case, the teacher would say, yes, Johnny, you have a question? And Johnny would say, no, I don't have a question. Didn't have my hand up. So in that case, the teacher says yes, but gets it incorrect. And that is known as a false alarm. So when there's no signal present, when it's just noise distribution, if you correctly say no, there's no signal, that's a correct rejection. But if you incorrectly say, yes, I detect a signal, that's a false alarm. So those are the two possible outcomes when there's no signal present. What about when we have that signal? and we add it to the noise distribution. So let's get rid of that noise distribution. We have that signal plus noise distribution now. So now we have a bunch of this distribution that falls to the right of the criterion. It has enough evidence. There is enough evidence out there where the teacher would say, oh, okay, this passes my criterion for whether a hand is up or not. So I'm going to say yes, there is a hand up, and I'm going to call on that person. And they say, yes, Diane, you have a question? And Diane says, yes, I do. I was wondering if you can explain what is the term for when you correctly identify that a signal is there? And you say, oh, well, very meta, but that's what's called a hit. So when the signal is there and you say, yes, a signal is there, that's a hit. And then we have the final scenario where Diane has her hand up and the teacher just doesn't call on her. Teacher just doesn't call on her. That hand is up, but that evidence doesn't reach criterion. Maybe the hand is up like this, right? It just doesn't have enough evidence. There's not enough signal plus noise to get it past that criterion. It falls to the left of the criterion. Not enough evidence. Teacher does not call on Diane, even though Diane has her hand up. So that is an incorrect answer, and that is known as a miss. So when the signal is present, if you say, yep, I see the signal, you have a hit. If you say no, no signal there, you have a miss. And those are the four possibilities that you can have when a signal is, when you're trying to detect a signal. So we'll put all four of them back up there. So when there's no signal present, you can be correct and you can say no signal, that's a correct rejection. When there is no signal present, you can be incorrect and say yes, that's a false alarm. When there is a signal present, you can say, be correct and say yes, that's a hit. And when there is a signal present, you can say no, and that's a miss. All right, so this situation where you measure how many correct rejections, how many hits, how many misses, how many false alarms, this is what allows us to determine where these noise distributions are and signal plus noise distributions are, and that allows us to determine that D prime, that sensitivity. And the reason that this is so powerful is because that distance that you calculate, that sensitivity that you calculate, does not matter in terms of the criterion. So whatever the criterion is, that does not matter. You can still detect how far apart this noise distribution is from the signal plus noise distribution. And the further apart that they are, the more sensitive the perceptual system. So we can see that in the next example here. So pay attention to the green areas and the red areas. What you want in a perceptual system is you want a lot of green and you want very little red. So you want as much green as you can possibly have. You want as little red as you can possibly have. You want correct rejections and hits. You don't want misses. You don't want false alarms. So if you can increase the distance between the noise distribution and the signal plus noise distribution, you have a situation like that, then that would mean that your correct rejections and your hits go up and your misses and your false alarms go down. So this is basically, if every child in the class just put their hand up like this to, get the teacher's attention, that would be this distribution here. However, let's say that every single child in that class all of a sudden started doing that thing where they're like, me, call me, I know it. That's a lot more evidence, right? All of a sudden you're in this situation. And the chances that you're gonna call or miss in this case, the chances that you're gonna miss Diane and she's not gonna get called on goes way, way down. Now you have way more hits and way fewer misses. So this idea of sensitivity being a larger distance between the two peaks, that makes intuitive sense, and that is what we mean by sensitivity in reality. And then the criterion doesn't matter in terms of your measure of sensitivity, and that's one of the big, powerful aspects of signal detection theory. So if all of a sudden a teacher decided, you know what, I hate not calling on children who want to be called on. I hate the misses. The misses are something that I really want to get rid of misses in my class. I don't want anybody that wants to participate to not get the experience of participating. But you can't do anything about your sensitivity, right? You can't increase your perceptual abilities. One thing that you can do is you can lower your criterion. And all of a sudden you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to call on anybody that I think even has remote evidence that they have their hand raised. So in effect, what you do is you take the level of evidence that you need and you reduce it. Notice that has implications in terms of your hits and your misses. Because all of a sudden your hits go up, right? Your hits go up because now you have more green area above the criterion line. So more children will get called upon. So you missed Diane last time when she had her hand up, but this time you're like, oh, Diane, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to call on you anyway. Do you have your hand up? Oh, yes, I do have my hand up. Thank you so much. So your misses go down and your hits go up, but it comes at a cost because now your correct rejections also go down and your false alarms go up. So now not only are fewer people going to be missed, but more people, more students who do not have their hand up will get called on as well. And that is just the reality of the situation. And again, it's captured very, very well in signal detection theory. And this is why signal detection theory can be used whether somebody has a very liberal criterion where they don't need a lot of evidence, or if they're responding very conservatively. And we're going to see in our discussions of this, there's good reasons to choose this in certain ways. So for example, your willingness for misses might be more in a primary education situation, right? Your willingness to tolerate misses might be greater in a primary care situation, but your willingness to tolerate misses would be way lower if you're an oncologist and your job was detecting cancer. Because on the one hand, if Diane doesn't get called on that day, maybe she'll get called on tomorrow. But if you do not detect that tumor at your, checkup or your screening, that's going to have huge impact. So depending upon how bad misses are, how bad false alarms are, you can move your criteria to accommodate those decisions. All right. So let's see this in action. So by now you have completed CogLab number 4, signal detection. So this is basically a sensitivity test that was used to measure your sensitivity in different situations. So randomly placed dots were displayed, and this was a star field. Your target was an additional set of 10 dots, and these were a straight line that slants downward from the left to the right. So that was your target. You had to find this signal, 10 dots in a row slanting downward in a noise distribution, whole bunch of stars displayed in the field. So that was your task, determine if the target was present in the star field. And you said present if the target was there. You said absent if the target was not there. And the variable was the number of distractors, the size of the star field. So there was 144, which is not a lot of noise, much lower amounts of evidence. There was 400, which is substantially more noise. And then there were star fields of 1,000 that had a ton of noise in the system, built into the system already. So let's see how we did. So the 144 star field, just to jog your memory, you would be looking at something like this. And then that would pop up and you needed to indicate whether there was the signal there. And in this case, you would say, yep, there's a signal. And they would show you the signal and they would be like, yep, you're correct. So you have detected that signal in that star field. So you got a hit. In this case, you said, yes, the line is there. The line of stars is there when the line of stars is actually there. That's 144 example. 400 looked like this. So in this case, once again, the signal is there. And if you said yes, and you were correct, and you scored another hit. And then finally, we have the 1,000 star field, which looks like that. And in this case, for this example, the star field is not there, sorry, the line is not there. So if you said it was absent, then you would be correct and you would get a correct rejection. If though, in this case, you said, oh yeah, I can see the line of stars, then you would have a false alarm. And if when the line of stars was there, you said, no, I don't see it, that would have been a miss. So you can imagine that we were much more sensitive to the signal in the 144 star situation and much less sensitive in the 1000 star field situation. So our sensitivity should be much higher as measured by signal detection in the 144 situation, lower in the 400 star field situation, and then much, much lower in the 1000 star field situation. So the question now is did signal detection theory pick that up? Was signal detection theory able to measure your ability to detect these lines of stars in the star field? All right, so let's start off with 144 stars. And this will give you an idea of exactly how signal detection makes all these determinations. So we have the evidence on the x-axis there. Once again, we got the frequency of the impression, how often do certain amounts of evidence occur. And then we have that normal distribution there for the signal plus noise. And what the CogLab did was it measured the hits, the false alarms, the correct rejections, and the misses. So we have hits at 94%, false alarms at 23%, correct rejections at 77%, and then misses at 6%. So once we have that information, we can start putting it into our distributions. So when we have the star field plus the target, and we say, so when the target is there, and we say yes, that target is there, that's going to be a hit. And we know that 94% of that distribution was hits. Right? 94% of that distribution is going to be green, because that's what a hit means. It was there, and we said it was there. So in that case, we can color in 94% of that distribution, and we can say, all right, those are the hits. The rest of this distribution has to be misses. That's the only other thing left in this distribution. And we know that 94% of it was hits. We have from our results, 6% of it was misses. That makes up 100% in total of the star field plus target distribution. So we have that little section there, and those are the misses. Once we know where the hits are, and once we know where the misses are, and that's where they have to be, 94% has to be on the right side, 6% has to be on the left side. And because of the normal distribution and the mathematics behind it, we know exactly how much is 94% and 6%. Once we know that, we know where your criterion is. It has to be there, because that is the line where you said yes. Beyond that line, I'm going to say I see the stars, and no, below that line, below that criterion, I'm going to say no, I don't see the stars. Once we have that criterion line, then we know exactly where the noise distribution goes, because we need to put a noise distribution on this graph where 77% of the noise distribution is correct rejections. That means 77% of this noise distribution has to be below that criterion line. And 23% of it has to be above the criterion line, because 23% was false alarms, saying that I see something when I don't see something. And the only reason you say I see something when I don't see something is because the evidence went beyond your criteria. And the only place on this graph that happens is right there. So we know that the noise distribution, just a star field, is exactly right there. The green area is your correct rejections. That big red area is your false alarms. So we can see that we were more concerned with misses than we were with false alarms, because we have more false alarms than we do have misses. But importantly, regardless of what we felt, regardless if we were trying really hard to notice the star field, and we weren't going to let a single one get by, even if we had to say yes to stuff that maybe looked, like this line of stars, regardless of what our strategy was, we can determine that sensitivity, because you can move that criterion line around, but that changes the hits, the false alarms, the correct rejections, and the misses. And it'll change it in a way where the distance between these two peaks will stay the same. And that again is the power of signal detection. So if I motivated you to do better on this task, if I said, hey, you know what, anybody that, scores, anybody that reduces their false alarms down to 10% gets a bonus on their final grade, you can do that. But you cannot do that without getting more misses, right? You can't decrease your false alarms without increasing your misses. So I could still measure your sensitivity, which in this case was 2.85, regardless of the strategy that you brought to this situation. So 2.85, that's the sensitivity. Don't ask what unit 2.85 is. It's basically compared to other situations that are similar into the one that we set up. So that measure of sensitivity is 2.85. How does it compare now to the star field with 400 stars? So we go through the exact same thing. We take a look at our 400 stars. We take a look at how we did. So we have 70% hits. False alarms was 39%. Correct rejections was 61%. Misses was 30%. So once again, we go through this and we say, well, there's your star field plus your target distribution. The hits are 70% of that distribution. And 70% is right there. That is 70% of the star field plus target distribution. Those are the hits. Below that, that is everything that you missed. So below that, those are the misses. So that's 30% of the distribution. And that means that your criterion for this one is right there. And once we have that criterion, we can then put the distribution for just the noise, for the false alarms and the correct rejections. And we need to place it in a point where 39% of this distribution is above criterion because that's a false alarm. 61% is below criterion because that is a correct rejection. The only place that happens is right there. We have our correct rejections. We have our false alarms. And in this case, once again, we measure our sensitivity, and the sensitivity has gone down. It was 2.85, I believe, in the previous one. Now it's down to 0.99. So we were worse in the 400 star field. Objectively, you can take a look at the numbers, and that is reflected in signal detection theory by a lower sensitivity. Signal detection theory says you are less sensitive to that line of stars when there are 400 units of noise being thrown at you in the star field. All right, last one. I got 900 here. I thought it was 1,000. Let's go back up to 1,000. All right, so 1,000 stars. How did we do when we were looking for that target, that line of stars, those 10 stars in a line, when there were 1,000 stars that were distracting you? Well, these are the numbers. We got hits at 61%, false alarms at 51%, correct rejections at 49%, and then misses at 39%. So you can see that for the false alarms and the correct rejections, we're basically flipping a coin at that point. But we'll get there in just a moment. So once again, we go through the exact same analysis. We got the star field plus the target. 61% hits. That means that we need to find the area of this distribution where 61% of it is in green, and that is the only place, right? That is 61% of that distribution. Those are the hits. We have 39% below that, making up 100% of the distribution in total, but 39% below that, those are the misses. So we have the hits, target was there, we said, yep, we see it. We have the misses, target was there, we said, no, we didn't see it. That gives us our criterion. Once we know where the criterion is, we can then put the false alarms and the correct rejection. So in this case, we need 51% of the noise distribution to be above criterion. We need 49% of the noise distribution to be below criterion. The only place that happens is right here. So it's a little hard to see because it is literally almost right on top of your signal plus noise. And that is why you had incredibly poor performance. I mean, false alarms and correct rejections was 50-50. You could have done just as well when there wasn't a target present if you blindfolded yourself and just randomly pressed, yes, I see it, and no, I don't see it. You would have done just as well when there wasn't a signal present. And that again is reflected in our sensitivity measure, where we now have a D prime of 0.29. So we started off with something like 2.85 on 144 star field, went down to 99 in the 400 star field, and now we're all the way down to 0.29. So we do have some ability. We're not at zero yet. We do have some ability, but that ability is way lower than we had in the 400 and 144 star. All right, so that was your cog lamp. So did your sensitivity to the target change as the star field increased from 144 to 400 to 1000 dots? We just saw that. Yes, it did change. It went down, so it decreased. So again, we can't tell you exactly what a sensitivity of 2.85 means. However, we can say that, yeah, your sensitivity at 144 was greater than your sensitivity at 400, was greater than your sensitivity at 1000 dots, and that was measured by the signal detection. Did your criteria move as the star field increased from 144 to 400 to 1000 dots? So this one was a little difficult. We would have to compare the positions of the graphs. However, just anecdotally, just on your own feelings, did anybody here change their strategy as you went from 144 to 400 to 1000? Did anybody become less conservative and just start saying, yes, I see it, even if they couldn't possibly see it? Or even if there was very little evidence that they saw it? Okay, so everybody maintained their criteria. All right. Well, that makes it really easy for the perceptual scientists to kind of interpret these results if you're not changing your criteria. But one of the points and one of the reasons why signal detection is so important in measuring sensitivity is that it really didn't matter. It wouldn't have mattered if you changed your criteria one way or the other. It wouldn't have mattered if all of a sudden you were very liberal with saying, yes, I see it in the 1000 star field, while you were very conservative in saying, yes, I see it in the 144 star field. That wouldn't have impacted our ability to measure you being way more sensitive in the 144 star field and way less sensitive in the 1000 star field. All right, so we are going to have a discussion of, like we normally do, of real world applications. But we're going to save that until next time, because that is a discussion that is going to take more than just the 10 minutes that we have left in class. However, I do want to kind of give you a hint in terms of how this can be applied to real world situations. So we hinted at this with the hands up or hands down. And it's very important to remember that, because if you're just talking about detecting lights in a dark room or detecting tones in your ear, then signal detection theory again becomes one of these kind of neat little tricks that you can do, but it doesn't really have a huge impact on your real world applications and impacting how the world operates. However, signal detection theory opens up massively in its implications when you start thinking about all the decisions that you make in your day-to-day life, where you say yes or no, and you can either be right or wrong. When you start thinking about signal detection theory in those terms, you can see that it starts to apply to a myriad of applications. So I'm just going to suggest some things for thought, and we'll pick these up next time that we meet. So many of you will be applying to grad school. Maybe not this year, but in the coming years, a lot of you are going to apply to grad school. And one of the things that you need to do when you go to apply to grad school is you need to decide, what grad school am I going to apply to? And how many grad schools am I going to apply to? And which ones am I going to apply to? And that is a signal detection problem. So let's take a look at what I mean here. So we have our noise distribution. And in this situation of applying to grad schools, your noise distribution are the grad schools that are going to reject your application. So there is, we'll set this up before I get to the evidence. So that's your noise distribution, reject your application. That is your signal plus noise distribution. Those are the ones that are going to accept your application. And there's certain amounts of evidence that are going to indicate whether or not your application is going to get accepted or rejected, right? So when you take a look at grad schools, they might say, well, you need a certain GPA. That's evidence in terms of whether you're going to get in or whether you're not going to get in, right? It might say things like, we value research experience. That's more evidence in terms of whether you're going to get in or whether you're not going to get in. What's their acceptance rate? That's more evidence in terms of whether you're going to get in or you're not going to get in, right? So there's a bunch of evidence that these grad schools can give you that will let you determine or help you determine, it won't let you, it'll help you determine which ones will you be successful in applying to and which ones will you not be successful in applying to. And from those considerations, you might set yourself up with a particular criteria. And you might say to yourself, I'm going to research a whole bunch of grad schools. And any grad school that goes beyond my criterion for evidence, I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to send an application to that grad school. And anyone that does not meet that evidence, I'm going to say, don't apply. I'm not going to send an application to that grad school. So what are the outcomes of this particular decision? Well, the ones that you don't apply, and they were going to reject your application anyway, that's a correct rejection. That's a preemptive rejection of them. So that's a correct rejection. You didn't invest your time. You didn't invest money. Some of these grad school applications can cost anywhere between $50 to $150 the last time I checked. So you saved yourself time, you saved yourself money. That was a correct rejection. However, you might have sent an application, or you will send an application to some grad school programs that will reject you. And those ones are the false alarms. And what is the cost of a false alarm? You're out time, you're out effort, you're out maybe some application fees. So you have to decide, what is the false alarm worth versus a correct rejection worth? And then you have the other side of that, which are the universities, the grad school programs that will accept you, right? And the ones that you send an application to, those are the hits. Those are the ones that are going to say, we've reviewed your applications, congratulations, we got a spot for you, let's go on further with the process. However, there are going to be grad schools that would have accepted you, but you decided that they didn't meet your evidential level of or criterion, and you did not apply to them. And those are the misses. And your decision in terms of what that criterion is, how much do you need to be sure that the grad school is going to accept you or not accept you, that is going to be 100% determined by your cost and the impact of those misses and those false alarms, right? So the hits, they're going to be the ones that you get into, but the ones that you apply to and you don't get into, those are going to have an impact, especially if they're costing you money and time. But the ones that you miss, the ones that maybe you could have got into and it would have been great, but you didn't get into it because you didn't apply, how much are those worth? How much are those going to be impacted? So do you want to adopt a strategy where you minimize your false alarms? So maybe you're struggling financially and you have to minimize your false alarms. So you would choose a higher criteria. Or maybe you're on the flip side of that and you put aside money and you have the money for the applications, and now you want to minimize your misses. So you're going to have a much more liberal criterion in terms of which grad schools do you apply to. So signal detection theory can help you determine what that kind of, and help you weigh out what's the importance of the misses, the false alarms, the correct rejections, and the hits, and how would they impact you going forward. And you can get that understanding of, you can't have one without the other. You can't trade off false alarms without increasing your misses. And again, signal detection theory allows you to appreciate that. All right, for people that are not going to be applying to grad school, the same thing happens with job applications, right? Do you go and apply to a job? Do you go for an interview for an application of a job, or do you not apply to something? And again, you have evidence. We're looking for a college degree. Awesome, evidence that I might get in. We need a degree in chemistry. Evidence that I might not get in. Although these days, a lot of times they will accept applications from majors that are not what they're asking for. So it, again, has that idea of what's a false alarm worth? How much is a miss worth? Right? You might go to the interview and they might take a look at you and say, wow, you are one of the most unqualified candidates I've ever seen. And now you're like, well, I got dressed up for this. I spent time preparing for this. And now on top of that, I get socially embarrassed. Well, that is a cost that I did not want to incur. False alarms suck. On the other hand, you can think about the misses that you have. Maybe that dream job that you had that you didn't apply to because you thought there's no way that you're going to get it. What are those worth? So we'll just finish up with two more examples just to show you that it's not all academic and jobs. This one, waving hi to somebody is a signal detection theory. Because I think we've all had that situation happen to us where we see somebody wave to us and then we wave to them and then we look behind and we see who they were really waving to. And now you're stuck in like limbo with the hand that you need to figure out something to do with. That's a signal detection theory. So whether or not you wave at people is a signal detection theory. Whether or not you acknowledge a wave is a signal detection theory. So do you wave back? Somebody's waving at you and you wave back. That's a hit. That increases the relationship, that increases the friendship. If somebody is waving at you and you don't wave back, all of a sudden they're like, well, why did you snub me? Why didn't you acknowledge me? That was kind of mean. That's a miss. If somebody's not waving at you and you don't wave at them, that's a correct rejection. But if somebody is not waving at you and you're like, oh, hey, and then you're like, oh my gosh, no. There's that social awkwardness, there's that social embarrassment to that situation. So you might set your criteria at a certain level when you're walking down the street as to whether or not you're going to respond to somebody that's waving at you. But that criteria is going to be very, very different. Your sensitivity is not going to be any different, but that criteria is going to be very different if you're walking down the street versus if you're part of a search and rescue team. Because if you're part of a search and rescue team, you got to start waving at people. If you're part of a search and rescue team, then you are going to say, well, you know what? Yeah, it would be socially awkward if I go up to this person and I say, hey, do you need to be rescued? And they're like, oh no, I'm just stretching. I was just, kind of exercising. You might feel a little bit, social embarrassment at that point, but the misses are huge. If you're on a search and rescue party, the misses are massive. So you have to move your criteria of your wave versus don't wave, acknowledge versus don't acknowledge, way down so that you are getting rid of all the misses, regardless of how many false alarms you have. And then the last one, and this one we're going to dive into a little deeper next time for sure, but definitely think about these situations in your own life. What about sexual advances? What about the decision as to whether or not to make a sexual advance? Whether or not you may, going to put some synonyms here so we know what we're talking about. Whether or not you make a suggestion or proposal of an amorous relation, whether you make a pass at, whether you come on to, whether you make advances to, whether you hit on, whether you make a play for. When you make that decision, what you're looking at is you're looking at a signal plus noise distribution, right? Because let's face it, at some point you have to make that overture. You have to make that decision. Otherwise, the world will just end and humanity will cease to exist. So you need to make that decision. So you have a signal detection theory, right? So make advances to. If you make advances on somebody and they're interested, that's a hit. And now you can begin the relationship. If somebody is interested and you do not make advances to, that's a miss. And that person is going to be sitting there going, well, what do I have to do to get this person's attention? Don't they see, I keep hanging around, I'm being very flirtatious, I've, tried my best and they still haven't, what is it? Well, that's a miss. When you go up to somebody, let's start off with the other one. When you take a look at somebody and you say to yourself, you know what? They're not interested. I'm not going to make advances. That's a correct rejection, right? Because they don't want the advance, and you correctly have determined, no, they don't want that advance. Problems occur a lot with the false alarms. When you come up to somebody and you say, oh, hey, let me holler at you, and they're like, well, no, not really, right? that's a false alarm. And that is, there's certain costs to those, right? There's certain costs to those in different situations. So this signal distribution analysis is very different when you're in a club, when you're in a social situation, than when you're at work, right? And we're going to take a look at the implications and what you can do and what signal detection theory says is the way to tackle this to minimize those false alarms and misses. We're going to take a look at that in the next. All right, so that is it for today. So again, think about these examples, think about things in your own life. Anytime that you have to make a yes or no decision, and you can either be right or wrong, that's signal detection. So try to notice a few of those before we meet next time. But other than that, we're done for today.